The year was 1989, a quiet rural town in the Midwest, the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and everyone knew each other's names. And then, one crisp autumn morning, one of those names vanished. Her name was Margaret Maggie Hensley, a beloved high school teacher, known for her warm smile, her soft voice, and the way she inspired students who didn't believe in themselves. She left home that October morning, wearing her usual navy cardigan, carrying her worn leather satchel, and promising her elderly father she'd be home for dinner. She never came back. At first, people thought maybe she had car trouble. Maybe she stopped to help someone in need. The small town reassured itself. It couldn't be anything darker. Not here, not to her. But as the hours turned to days, and the days stretched into weeks, the town's faith began to fracture. Whispers filled the diner. Rumors seeped into the church pews. Everyone wondered the same question. How could a woman like Maggie simply vanish without a trace? There was no forced entry at her modest home. Her car was parked neatly in the school lot. Her classroom was just as she'd left it. Papers stacked, chalk dust on the board, a single apple from a student still resting on her desk. The police searched the woods. Neighbors organized night patrols. Parents clutched their children a little tighter. But Maggie was gone. And then, 30 years later, long after the case had grown cold, long after her name had faded from the local headlines, something surfaced. Hidden inside a locked wooden box in an old farmhouse attic, tucked behind yellowing wallpaper and forgotten furniture, was a diary written in Maggie's own hand. Its pages revealed something no one in town had ever suspected, a life she had kept in the shadows, a secret existence she had worked desperately to conceal. And with it, new questions. Was Maggie a victim of circumstance? Or had she been living a double life all along? Because what was written in those pages didn't just change the case. It changed everything. To understand Margaret Hensley's disappearance, we need to first understand the woman behind the name. Margaret was born in 1949 in the same small town where she would later vanish. She was the daughter of Harold and Elaine Hensley, a modest couple who ran a hardware store on Main Street. From a young age, Margaret stood out. While other children played tag in the fields, she was the quiet observer, always with a book clutched in her hands, always writing little stories in the margins of her school notebooks. Teachers described her as bright but reserved. She was the kind of girl who preferred the library to the playground, and who often volunteered to help teachers clean up after class. She didn't crave attention. She craved knowledge. After high school, she went on to study English literature at a nearby state university. It wasn't an easy journey. Her family wasn't wealthy, and she worked part-time as a waitress to pay her tuition. But Margaret never complained. She had an inner drive that seemed unshakable. When she returned to her hometown after graduation, she accepted a teaching position at the local high school. For many, it was a surprise. Some expected her to chase a bigger life in a bigger city. But Margaret had her reasons for staying. She often told friends that every small town deserves good teachers. In the classroom, she was different from the quiet girl people remembered. She came alive in front of her students, reading poetry aloud with a kind of conviction that made even the most restless teenagers sit up and listen. She encouraged debates, rewarded curiosity, and never made anyone feel small for asking questions. Former students later described her as the teacher who believed in you when no one else did. But despite her presence at school, Margaret's personal life remained strangely private. She never married, never dated publicly, rarely attended town events outside of mandatory school functions. While others her age were raising families, she lived alone in a modest white house near the edge of town with her aging father. Neighbors noticed her routines. The porch light always clicked on at precisely 7 p.m. The garden, though modest, was perfectly kept. Neatly trimmed hedges, rows of tulips, a bird bath scrubbed clean. She jogged the same route every morning and bought the same groceries every Saturday. To most, she seemed steady, predictable, safe. But under that steadiness, there were little details, subtle ones, that didn't quite fit the image of the small-town teacher. Every so often, she would vanish for weekends, telling colleagues she was visiting an old college friend. But no one ever seemed to know who that friend was or where they lived. On rare occasions, townsfolk spotted her in nearby cities, walking quickly with her satchel, dressed differently than usual. Darker colors, her hair tied back tightly, a seriousness in her expression. When neighbors asked, she'd laugh it off, saying she was just attending professional development workshops. And then there were the locked drawers in her home. Close friends said she never let anyone inside her study. She always kept the door closed, and the key was never far from her pocket. Still, none of these quirks raised real alarm at the time. In a small town, people respected privacy. Margaret was a kind woman, a good teacher, a dutiful daughter. No one thought to press her for answers until she disappeared. Because only after her vanishing did those quirks begin to look less like habits and more like signs. Signs that Margaret Hensley's life wasn't as simple as it seemed. It was Tuesday, October 17, 1989. The day began like any other. Margaret rose early, jogging her usual 2-mile route along the quiet roads that bordered the town's cornfields. Neighbors recalled seeing her wave politely, her navy jogging suit and white sneakers moving at a steady pace. She returned home around 6:30 a.m., fed the family's aging tabby cat, and prepared breakfast for her father, Harold. By 7:15, she was dressed in her usual attire, a pressed blouse, dark skirt, and her favorite navy cardigan. She grabbed her worn leather satchel, kissed her father on the cheek, and promised to be back in time for dinner. Those would be the last words he ever heard from her. Margaret's car, a modest blue Chevrolet Cavalier, was later found parked in its usual spot in the high school lot. Inside, investigators noted her teaching materials were neatly arranged: stacks of essays, a thermos, and her lunch bag. Nothing seemed out of place. Her classroom told a similar story. The blackboard was half covered with chalk notes about a literature assignment. On her desk rested a bright red apple, a gift from a student, alongside a handwritten seating chart. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned chairs, no broken glass. It was as if she had simply walked out of the room and never returned. According to the official school schedule, Margaret taught her first 2 classes without incident. Students later confirmed she appeared calm, cheerful, and entirely normal. At 10:30 a.m., she dismissed her second period class, told them to study the poem carefully for Thursday's quiz, and began gathering her materials for the next group. But when the bell rang for third period, Margaret was gone. Students entered to find the classroom empty. At first, they thought she might be running late from a teacher's meeting. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. A substitute was called in to cover the class. By noon, concern was mounting. The school principal attempted to call Margaret's home. No answer. By 3 p.m., when she failed to pick up her father's medication from the pharmacy as promised, panic began to set in. That evening, Harold Hensley contacted police. Officers quickly swept through her home. The front door was locked. The house appeared undisturbed. Her bed was neatly made, clothes folded, dishes washed. On the kitchen counter sat a half-written grocery list. One detail stood out: her study. The locked room she rarely let anyone enter remained secured. The police requested the key from Harold, who admitted he didn't have one. That was Maggie's private space, he explained. She kept it locked always. For the time being, officers respected that privacy, assuming she'd return. But she didn't. Search teams combed the nearby woods, fields, and rivers. Helicopters scanned the area. Bloodhounds were brought in, but the scent trail led nowhere. It simply stopped near the school parking lot. Witnesses were few. One student thought they saw Margaret walking down a hallway at around 10:40 a.m., just minutes after she had finished her second period class. Another claimed they saw her near the rear exit doors of the school, moving quickly, clutching her satchel tighter than usual. And then there was the janitor's statement. Around 11 a.m., he noticed the back door of the school, usually secured, was propped open. He assumed a teacher had stepped out for fresh air. At the time, it didn't strike him as odd, but when pieced together, the timeline suggested something chilling. Margaret had left the building during school hours and never returned. No body, no note, no clear trail. 3 days after Margaret's disappearance, police made their first significant discovery. A local farmer, checking the edges of his property about 5 miles from town, stumbled upon something unusual. In a shallow ditch, partially concealed by fallen leaves, lay Margaret's leather satchel. The strap was snapped as if it had been yanked forcefully. Inside, investigators found scattered papers, graded essays with her handwriting across the margins, a cracked pair of reading glasses, and an uncapped fountain pen. What they did not find were her house keys, her wallet, or her lesson planner. Those items were missing. This discovery immediately shifted the case from missing person to suspected foul play. A woman like Margaret didn't simply discard her belongings. And if she had planned to leave willingly, why abandon her satchel in such a haphazard way? The police formed a task force, but resources were thin. This was a small town, unaccustomed to major crimes. The sheriff's office borrowed detectives from the county, and for weeks, the investigation consumed the community. Investigators interviewed every teacher, every student, every janitor. Most described Margaret as calm, professional, and predictable. No one recalled her expressing fear, distress, or plans to leave. Yet, when asked about her private life, responses grew vague. She kept to herself, one teacher said. Kind, yes, but she never really talked about her life outside of school. A few students added strange details. One girl admitted she once saw Margaret in town late at night, speaking in hushed tones with a man by a payphone. Another student swore they saw her meeting someone at a diner, her face tense, her posture different from the warm, open teacher they knew. But no one could name the man. Attention quickly turned to Harold, her father. At 72, he was frail and relied heavily on Margaret. His statement never wavered. She left for school that morning as usual and promised to be home for dinner. Detectives searched the house thoroughly. Again, everything seemed ordinary except for that locked study. This time, investigators insisted on entry. The door was forced open. Inside was a meticulously organized room. Shelves of books, binders stacked neatly, rows of notebooks. At first glance, nothing incriminating. But one desk drawer was locked within a locked room. After prying it open, police found what appeared to be journals. Dozens of them, filled with Margaret's looping handwriting. The journals were personal reflections, accounts of her days, her struggles, her frustrations. Most were mundane, but tucked inside one was something startling. A receipt for a motel room in a city 60 miles away. The date on it was less than 3 weeks before she vanished. Detectives visited the motel. The clerk vaguely remembered a woman matching Margaret's description. She had checked in under her own name, paid in cash, and stayed just one night. He added one detail that stuck with investigators. She wasn't alone. A man came with her. Tall, dark jacket. They left early the next morning. When pressed, he admitted he couldn't remember the man's face. This was the first concrete sign that Margaret may have been involved in something hidden, something her neighbors and students never knew about. The satchel was analyzed by forensic teams. At the time, 1989, DNA testing was still in its infancy, but investigators did lift a partial fingerprint from the broken strap. Unfortunately, it didn't match anyone in the police database. What unsettled detectives was the way the bag was found. It looked staged, as if someone had deliberately discarded it to be discovered. Was it meant as a clue or a distraction? Piecing together the timeline proved frustrating. 7:15 a.m., Margaret leaves home. 8 to 10:30 a.m., she teaches her first 2 classes. Normal behavior. 10:40 a.m., last confirmed sighting in the school hallway. 11 a.m., janitor notices back door propped open. After 11 a.m., she vanishes. No one could explain what would drive her to exit the school mid-morning. There were no phone calls logged to her classroom, no emergencies at home, nothing. The community fractured under the weight of speculation. Some believed she had been kidnapped, a random predator, perhaps lurking near the school. Others whispered about an affair, pointing to the motel receipt. The harshest rumors suggested she had staged her own disappearance, running from a life she no longer wanted. The police, under pressure, pursued all angles. Roadblocks were set up. Neighbors were interrogated. Her bank accounts were monitored. Not a single withdrawal was made after the day she vanished. Weeks stretched into months. Each lead grew colder than the last. By Christmas of 1989, hope in the town had withered. Her father aged rapidly, sitting by the window each night, convinced his daughter would walk back up the driveway. Students left apples on her empty desk, the fruit slowly rotting until janitors cleaned it away. The case stalled, and yet, behind the scenes, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret had secrets. Secrets buried in her journals. Secrets that connected to that motel stay. The problem was simple. No one could yet prove what those secrets were. With the investigation stalled, police shifted focus to individuals who might have played a role in Margaret's disappearance. Some suspects emerged quickly. Others were more elusive. And as with many small-town mysteries, every theory seemed to generate more questions than answers. The first and most obvious suspect was Harold Hensley, Margaret's elderly father. It wasn't unusual. Statistically, investigators often begin with family. On the surface, Harold appeared harmless. A widower in declining health, dependent on Margaret for care. Neighbors described him as gentle, soft-spoken, and completely devastated by her disappearance. He broke down during interviews, repeating the same detail. She promised me she'd be home for dinner, but police couldn't ignore certain inconsistencies. Harold claimed Margaret never traveled, yet the motel receipt proved otherwise. Was he lying or simply unaware of his daughter's private life? Investigators leaned toward the latter. They found no financial motive. Harold had no insurance policy on his daughter, and his alibi placed him at home the entire day she vanished. Eventually, suspicion drifted away from Harold, but his frailty and grief made him a tragic figure. Some whispered he died, still believing his daughter would walk back through the door. Attention soon turned toward Margaret's co-workers. Among them was a fellow teacher, Richard Carlson, a history instructor with a reputation for being charming but somewhat volatile. Several colleagues mentioned seeing Richard and Margaret engaged in hushed conversations in the weeks before she vanished. Students even noticed tension between them, quiet arguments in hallways, abrupt silences when others walked in. When questioned, Richard denied any inappropriate relationship. He admitted they had disagreements over teaching methods, but insisted it was nothing more. Police probed deeper, discovering he was recently divorced and living alone. His ex-wife claimed he had a temper. Then came the most intriguing detail. Phone records showed several late-night calls from Richard's home to Margaret's house in the months before her disappearance. He explained it as discussions about lesson plans, but the frequency raised eyebrows. Despite suspicion, no evidence tied Richard directly to foul play. His alibi checked out. On the morning Margaret disappeared, he was teaching his own class, corroborated by dozens of students. Still, whispers about a secret relationship persisted. The motel clerk's account of a man seen with Margaret cracked open another avenue. Who was he? Detectives combed through her journals, hoping for a name. Most entries were mundane, but a few cryptic lines stood out. The meetings are becoming harder to explain. He says he understands, but I feel trapped. If anyone knew, it would ruin everything. The entries didn't identify the man, but they painted a picture of someone significant in her life. Someone she was both drawn to and fearful of. Several townsfolk came forward claiming to have seen Margaret in nearby cities with an unidentified man. Descriptions varied. Tall, short, dark hair, light hair, nothing consistent enough to build a composite sketch. The mystery man quickly became the focal point of rumors. Some believed he was married. Others speculated he was involved in something illegal, gambling, smuggling, or worse. Without a name, though, he remained a ghost in the investigation. Margaret was admired by many students, but there were exceptions. One in particular stood out, a troubled teenager named Kevin Ward. Kevin had a history of behavioral issues, and Margaret often clashed with him. Weeks before her disappearance, she had reported him for plagiarism, resulting in his suspension from the basketball team. Friends said Kevin was furious, claiming she had ruined his future. When questioned, Kevin admitted he resented her, but insisted he had nothing to do with her vanishing. His alibi placed him in detention during the time she disappeared, supervised by another teacher. While the motive was plausible, the timeline didn't fit. Kevin faded from the suspect list, but remained in the town's rumor mill for years. Not all theories pointed inward. Some investigators considered the possibility of a traveling criminal. The late 1980s saw several cases of women abducted by drifters or long-haul truck drivers passing through rural towns. Margaret's routine, jogging alone in the mornings and leaving school by the rear exit, could have made her vulnerable. The abandoned satchel found near a county road lent credibility to this idea. The problem? No evidence linked her case to known offenders. The FBI briefly reviewed the file, comparing it to similar disappearances across state lines, but nothing concrete emerged. The case produced countless false leads, each one distracting investigators. One woman claimed to have seen Margaret at a bus station 2 weeks after her disappearance. The sighting proved false. Surveillance footage showed someone else entirely. Another lead came from a psychic, who told police Margaret was buried near water under a large tree. Dozens of volunteers dug through muddy riverbanks. Nothing was found. Perhaps the strangest red herring came from an anonymous letter sent to the sheriff's office. Written in shaky handwriting, it read, "She knew too much. That's why she had to go." Investigators traced it to a mentally ill man in another town who had no connection to Margaret. Every dead and chipped away at hope. The town became divided. Some believed Margaret was taken by force. Others whispered she had lived a double life, and the diary entries proved it. Parents warned their daughters to be careful. Teachers locked doors, and the high school carried an unshakable shadow. For Margaret's students, her disappearance was formative. Many said it was the first time they realized bad things could happen to good people, even in a place that seemed safe. By early 1990, the case was frozen. With no body, no concrete suspect, and no new evidence, detectives had little to go on. Each person of interest, her father, her colleague, the mystery man, the student, the stranger theory, had gaps but also alibis or insufficient proof. It was the perfect storm of uncertainty. And for 30 years, that uncertainty lingered, until the diary was discovered. And with it, everything investigators thought they knew was shattered. For 30 years, Margaret's disappearance remained a wound in the town's memory, unsolved, unexplained, and slowly fading into the realm of ghost stories told by students who inherited her empty classroom. And then, in the summer of 2019, everything changed. A couple renovating an old farmhouse on the edge of town stumbled across something strange. Behind a section of crumbling wallpaper in the attic, wedged between beams and hidden under dust, was a locked wooden box. Weathered, heavy, its brass clasp tarnished with age. Inside were letters, photographs, and most importantly, a diary. Margaret's diary, unlike her other journals found in her study. These entries weren't mundane accounts of daily life. These pages were different, urgent, emotional, confessional. One entry read, "I'm tired of the secrecy. I'm tired of sneaking around like a criminal. If the truth ever comes out, it will destroy me here. They'll never see me the same way." Another line chilled investigators when the diary reached their hands. "He says it's dangerous for me to keep these notes, but I need proof in case something happens to me." Proof? Proof of what? The photographs tucked inside the box gave a hint. They showed Margaret in places no one knew she had ever been. Standing outside a government building 2 counties away. Sitting in a diner booth with a man whose face was always obscured. Turned away from the camera, blurred by movement, or cropped out entirely. One photo in particular stood out. Margaret, wearing sunglasses, standing near a payphone. Behind her, faint but visible, was the reflection of a man in the glass. A tall figure in a dark jacket. The letters deepened the mystery. Some were written in Margaret's hand, addressed only with the initial R. Others appeared to be from the same mysterious man, his handwriting blocky and rushed. One note read, "You have to trust me. If anyone finds out, it won't just be your reputation, it'll be your life." For detectives, This was the first tangible thread pointing toward a hidden relationship, one far more serious than idle gossip about a colleague or a stranger. The diary also revealed something else: Margaret's growing fear. Her final entry, dated just days before her disappearance, read, "I saw him near the school today, watching me. I told him this has to stop. He didn't answer, just stared. If I don't show up tomorrow, maybe they'll finally know why." For 30 years, the case had been built on the assumption that Margaret was simply a quiet teacher who vanished without explanation. But now, suddenly, it appeared she had been living another life. One filled with secrecy, with meetings, with fear. The revelation of the diary didn't just reopen the case. It flipped it upside down. Because now, investigators weren't asking what happened to Margaret. They were asking, who was Margaret really? And more importantly, who was the man she feared? When the hidden diary was turned over to authorities in 2019, it reignited a case long believed unsolvable. Detectives who had been children when Margaret vanished now pored over her words with fresh eyes, and the details within painted a darker, more complex picture than anyone had ever imagined. The journal entries suggested two things. Margaret had been involved in a secret relationship, and she felt threatened by it. But the identity of the man, remained unclear. Detectives pulled the original case files from dusty archives. They reanalyzed Margaret's satchel, now with modern forensic tools. New DNA testing revealed two partial male profiles on the leather strap, neither belonging to her father nor to Richard Carlson, the history teacher once suspected. It was a breakthrough, but both profiles failed to match any records in the national database. Whoever handled her satchel wasn't in the system, or had never been caught for anything before. The satchel also contained a detail overlooked in 1989, a slip of paper folded deep inside an essay. It wasn't one of Margaret's notes, but a receipt. A gas station receipt from a town 60 miles away, the same area where the motel was located. The timestamp? October 14th, 1989. Just 3 days before she vanished. This placed her far outside her usual routine shortly before her disappearance, reinforcing the theory she had been meeting someone secretly. The letters inside the attic box became the subject of forensic analysis. Handwriting experts compared the blocky, rushed script to samples from known suspects. The results were chilling. The writing bore striking similarities to that of Richard Carlson, her colleague. While not a perfect match, the patterns in strokes and spacing were enough to suggest he may have been the mysterious R. When confronted, Carlson, now in his 70s and living in another state, denied everything. He admitted he and Margaret had been close friends, but insisted it was nothing improper. "She trusted me," he said in an interview, "but I never hurt her. I never would." Still, investigators couldn't shake the possibility. Had their quiet, private relationship turned darker? Detectives began re-interviewing people who had lived in town during 1989. Memories had faded, but some details resurfaced. One retired secretary recalled seeing Margaret on the Friday before her disappearance, sitting in her car in the school parking lot. She wasn't alone. A man stood by her window, leaning close, gesturing with his hands. The secretary couldn't see his face but described him as tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. The description eerily matched the blurred reflection in the diary photograph. Another former student, now an adult, came forward with a haunting memory. On the morning of Margaret's disappearance, as he walked past the back doors of the school, he saw her standing, just outside with a man. She looked nervous, he recalled, like she didn't want to be there. "I didn't think about it then, but now, I wonder if that was the last time anyone saw her alive." Margaret's bank records were re-examined. In the months leading up to her disappearance, she had withdrawn small amounts of cash regularly, always under $100, always just enough to avoid drawing attention. Where's that money going? Investigators suspected she was funding her secret meetings, motel stays, gas, maybe even payments to someone. The pattern suggested she was planning carefully, but also hiding her activities from those around her. Why was the box of evidence hidden in the farmhouse attic? The property had belonged to the Reynolds family, distant relatives of Margaret's mother. Investigators learned that after the Reynolds moved away in the early 1990s, the house sat vacant for decades until it was sold and renovated. Had Margaret hidden the box there herself, using a place no one would think to search? Or had someone else, perhaps her mysterious companion, stashed it there to keep it away from investigators? Detectives found no fingerprints on the box itself, but dust analysis suggested it had been untouched since the late 1980s, meaning it had likely been placed there right around the time she disappeared. Piecing everything together, a haunting portrait emerged. Margaret, the quiet teacher, had been living a double life. She was meeting a man in secret, possibly a colleague, possibly someone more dangerous. She was keeping records, receipts, letters, photographs, despite being warned not to. And in her final entry, she explicitly voiced fear for her life. The most chilling possibility? That Margaret herself had left behind these clues intentionally, knowing something was coming. When the diary details were released, the town was shaken again. Former students, now parents and grandparents, gathered at the high school auditorium for a vigil. People debated whether Margaret had been a victim of obsession, a woman trapped in an affair gone wrong, or something even darker. Some insisted Richard Carlson had always been too close to her. Others pointed to the possibility of a stranger, someone passing through who left no trace except fear. Armed with the new evidence, investigators officially reopened the case. FBI profilers reviewed the file, noting that Margaret's meticulous documentation suggested she was preparing for exposure. Victims don't usually keep records unless they know they're in danger, one profiler stated. But the deeper detectives dug, the clearer one fact became. Margaret hadn't been the woman everyone thought she was. And if the truth was buried in those diaries, it might also be buried in the shadows of the people closest to her. Because the diary had revealed one shocking twist. Margaret feared for her life. But what came next would be even more explosive. For months, detectives worked under the assumption that R was a shadowy figure, an unknown man who manipulated Margaret into secrecy. But as they dug deeper, analyzing handwriting samples, re-examining school files, and cross-referencing staff record from the late 1980s, one shocking detail emerged. The handwriting in the letters matched someone already in the case file. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an outsider. It was Principal Howard Green. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The man who had stood in front of news cameras in 1989, pleading for Margaret's safe return. The man who told reporters he considered her like family. The man who had organized vigils, comforted grieving students, and demanded answers from police. He was R. Investigators confronted Green, now an elderly man living quietly 2 towns over. At first, he denied everything, claimed the diary was fabricated, the letters forgeries. But the evidence piled up. Handwriting experts confirmed the match. Old financial records showed Green had made unexplained withdrawals around the same time Margaret had taken unaccounted trips. And then came the discovery that broke the case open further. A long-forgotten storage unit rented under Green's name. Inside were stacks of boxes, school memorabilia, yearbooks, and at the bottom of one crate, tucked beneath loose files, was a woman's scarf. Pale blue, faded with time. Margaret's sister identified it immediately. It was the one Margaret had worn the week she disappeared. The implication was devastating. Had the beloved principal, the trusted figurehead of the school, been involved in an illicit relationship with Margaret? Had their secrets spiraled out of control? And, most damning of all, was he responsible for her disappearance? Green stuck to his story, said the scarf had been left behind at the school, that he kept it for memory's sake. But the diary told another story. Margaret had grown fearful of him. She wrote of his anger, his possessiveness, his insistence that no one could know. One haunting line stood out. He says, "If I ruin him, he'll ruin me. But I can't live like this anymore." The town that once revered Green was shaken to its core. Parents who had trusted him with their children now wondered if he had hidden something monstrous all along. Former students recalled his kindness, his charisma, but also his temper when challenged. Detectives now faced a chilling possibility. Margaret hadn't simply run away. She hadn't been abducted by a stranger. She may have been silenced by the very man who had spent 3 decades pretending to seek justice for her. And if Green was indeed the man in the reflection, watching her at that payphone in the photograph, it meant Margaret had seen the danger coming, but she hadn't escaped it. The interrogation room was silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. Across the table sat Howard Green, the once celebrated principal who had been a pillar of the community. Detectives laid out the diary, the letters, the scarf, the photographs. Piece by piece, the walls closed in. Green's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his face hardening. "This doesn't prove anything," he muttered. "It's all hearsay. I didn't hurt her." But when investigators pressed harder, asking why his handwriting matched the mysterious R, why Margaret's scarf was hidden among his belongings, his composure cracked. Finally, Green whispered, almost to himself. She was supposed to stay quiet. The room froze. He admitted what many had long suspected. He and Margaret had been involved in a secret relationship. He confessed that she had threatened to expose him, ruining not only his career, but his carefully cultivated reputation as the town's moral authority. But when asked the ultimate question, what happened to her, his answer only deepened the mystery. "I didn't kill her," he said, his voice breaking. "I just tried to scare her. She left that night. I never saw her again." Detectives pressed for more, but Green wouldn't budge. Was he lying to cover his tracks? Or was Margaret truly still out there, having slipped away into a self-imposed exile? The evidence was damning, but incomplete. No body, no definitive proof of murder. Without it, prosecutors knew they faced an uphill battle. Green was charged with obstruction, evidence tampering, and misconduct, but not homicide. The courtroom was packed when the trial began. Neighbors, former students, reporters from across the state all waited to hear the truth, but the truth never fully came. Green maintained his story. Margaret's family wept in frustration, and when the verdict was read, guilty on lesser charges but acquitted of murder, the town erupted in anger. For some, the case was solved. Green had driven Margaret into silence, and her disappearance was his doing. For others, the mystery endured. Had he killed her and concealed it too well? Or had Margaret truly vanished on her own, her final act a desperate attempt to escape a man who controlled her life? The big reveal was not closure. It was a fracture between what could be proved and what everyone felt in their bones. Green went to prison. Margaret's fate remained a shadow. In the diary, its last page torn and unfinished, whispered the one line no one could forget. "If I disappear, don't believe him." Today, more than 3 decades later, the case of Margaret Holloway remains one of the town's deepest scars. The diary gave a voice to her fear. The evidence pointed to a man who lived a double life. And yet, the ultimate answer slipped away like smoke. Some believe Margaret was murdered, her body hidden in some forgotten field or riverbed. Others believe she escaped, reinventing herself far from the town that suffocated her. A woman too intelligent, too strong, to let her life end at the hands of someone else's control. And then there are the strange sightings. Over the years, reports trickled in from neighboring states. A woman in a small bookstore who looked like Margaret. A stranger at a bus station carrying a scarf just like hers. Each tip investigated, each one fading into dead ends. The diary remains in police custody. Its final, unfinished page still haunts everyone who reads it. One line written in a hurried scrawl, the ink smeared by what might have been tears. If you're reading this, it means I failed to escape him. Or, I finally did. The town holds vigils every year. Former students, now grown with children of their own, leave flowers at the steps of the old high school. Some whisper her name like a prayer. Others refuse to speak of her at all, as if silence could bury the shame. As for Howard Green, he died in prison, taking his final secrets with him. So we're left with only questions. Did Margaret die at the hands of the man she feared? Or did she walk away from everything, erasing herself from the life she no longer wanted? And the most chilling question of all, if she is still out there, why has she never come back?